Welcome to Australian Taekwondo Talk, where we meet the people who make our martial art great. Brought to you by Ageless Taekwondo, part of the Move It Oz initiative, a modified program for over 65s that's accessible, affordable and implemented in a community setting. Stay tuned to find out how you or a loved one can get involved.
Today, you will meet a fourth Dan black belt who, at the age of 5, had a horrific accident that could well have destroyed any dreams of a competitive sporting career. That accident cost 5-year-old Darrel Sparke his leg, but it sent him on a trajectory through life that would inspire him to Taekwondo excellence and is now reshaping the future of Taekwondo in Australia. Hello and welcome to Australian Taekwondo Talk, where you'll meet the people across the vast expanse of Australia who make up our Taekwondo community and learn about their lives and their love for this martial art. I'm Aaron Carney, and today we're joined by Darrel Sparke. Welcome to Australian Taekwondo Talk.
Thank you, Aaron.
Let's start many years before you even discovered Taekwondo. It's 1976. You're an typical, energetic, carefree 5-year-old, I'm assuming, at a school out in Orange. Something happened that would change your life forever.
Yeah, so I grew up in a small country community at that time, and we're talking a small primary school with infants attached, with a top head count of something like 20 kids. So it's really quite tiny. It was just the starting time of school for me. I just entered the school time. In fact, it was Friday the 13th, 1976 in February, and I just turned 5 on the 8th of February, just before it.
So literally 2 or 3 weeks into school?
Yeah, literally the very start of school for me.
And what do you remember of that day?
I have memories of the event, the accident, and they're kind of cinematically produced in your head. As a 5-year-old, your brain does some pretty amazing things to keep you safe. And while I have an excellent memory of the events around that particular episode, I don't remember a great deal for 3 months after that, or anything terribly recent before it. But then again, I'm getting old.
Yeah, and it is a psychological phenomenon that a highly emotional or impactful event like that is going to burn deep into a young psyche. So of the memory that is cinematic, what can you recall?
Well, I can recall that at the time we had a different teacher to our regular practice. The gentleman who was normally there was away, and we had a relief teacher. I was out in the playground playing. Remember, it's 1976, so things were a little bit different in the education department back then, and the way that we work with the work health and safety. It was common practice for the school captain to mow the yard or mow the oval.
Ah.
So while the school captain was mowing the oval on a ride-on mower, I was playing with a new friend with an old cane hoop. I'm sounding really old here, aren't I? And so we were rolling the hoop past the path, and the lawnmower had come and gone, and the grass was wet. And in a cruel twist of fate, I guess, I ran past what would have been a normally successful transition across the path of a mower, probably a little bit short on time, but shouldn't have been any problem, except that as I ran past, I stepped on a wet stone in the ground. And that stone, even today, I can still see the stone. It was a concave stone shaped like a crescent moon. And when I stepped on that stone, I slipped on the stone, the wet grass, on my right leg, and slipped in underneath the mower. My left leg went to the outside, my right leg went in underneath. And
the spinning blade.
With the spinning blades, yes.
Without being unduly graphic, what was the state of you at that point?
Look, everything stopped in the world. It's kind of like a slow motion point. The young fellow on the mower obviously responded, and we've been friends for life after that. But he jumped off the mower and brought it to a stop. Obviously, walked up before he jumped off. His sister, because it was kind of in front of, we had school steps up in the schoolhouse. It was a single schoolhouse, and his sister, seeing what happened, basically flew up the steps over the rail and into the teacher. teacher's office, and he came straight over the top and jumped down, and he picked up this big heavy mower in an act of response and emergency off me. He then scooped me up. At this point, I've got no sound. There's no sound to this event. It's just pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And he picked me up and ran me round to the passenger side of his tan Kingswood and threw me in on the front bench seat. And he then ran round to the other side. I looked down and saw the damage to my leg and realised I was in trouble, but I still had no sound. So he jumped in the car, hit the gas, and off we went for the 13, 15 kilometre ride into Orange Base Hospital.
You say that the next 3 months are pretty furry in your mind, but what do you remember of having to come to terms with life with your leg missing just below the knee? Is that right?
Yeah, so in terms of accidents, I guess I hit the optimal spot when it came to having your leg cut off. So I was very lucky in that regard. But I mean, for me, it was quite a challenge. I mean, as a child's mind, as I said earlier, will take control and break away from the things that will do you harm. And I still remember the events that took place in the emergency room. I remember literally dying on the gurney, feeling my body give up, and a little voice saying, "It's okay, let go." So it's quite a surreal aspect. And so at that point, they wheeled me into an elevator to go down to surgery, and the surgeon actually pulled out the hacksaw and said, "It's time." And the only sound I have is him saying, "Now, we need to do this now." And that's when I lose my memory for 3 months.
When you say you felt yourself effectively die, do you mean literally? Were you in danger of losing your life?
Yes. They were desperately trying to keep me alive. And you see cinematic productions where the first person is sensing their body being moved around and jiggled, but there's no sound and that sort of event. And that's what was happening to me. And I literally felt my body let go and just give up at that point. So it's quite a surreal thing. And it wasn't a horrific in the sense it was bad. There was no fear sense associated with that point, but I was just so tired. I'd run out of blood because I didn't actually. Teachers weren't taught a lot about first aid back then, so there was no tourniquet on my leg for that 15-kilometre ride. So I'd basically run out of blood by the time I'd made it to the hospital. So they were desperately trying to keep me alive at that point. So that little voice in my head said, "It's okay to go to sleep. It's okay to do that. You're tired. It's okay." And I guess the biggest thing for me is I didn't do that because my father was standing next to me holding my hand. And he was desperately mouthing or saying, "Don't leave me, don't leave me." And the sheer horror on his face, that helplessness, and my father's a strong man, just impacted me so much. To this day, I cannot lose the image of my father's face and the desperation as he held my hand helplessly. So I guess there was that sense of needing to stay there for family. And that's been with me ever since. That's the biggest and strongest memory I have in my mind from any time under the age of sort of 12, 13.
Beyond the physical recovery that I imagine took some time, what was the psychological and emotional recovery of now being a 5-year-old with one leg?
Well, that's a difficult process. For amputation, the trauma of the event is one thing. Then you have the trauma of amputation, and that's quite a unique thing. So in hospital, I only have stories of people telling me what it was like in hospital for me. So, for example, very hard for a child to accept their leg is gone. So I would get up and try and get out of bed and then fall to the floor, expecting my leg to be there to hold me up. And that would happen continuously while I was in hospital. After leaving hospital and making it home, my parents had to cope with the circumstances because the event itself created a subconscious nightmare that reoccurred constantly for me. And it was only after going through processing in the court system and looking at compensation down the track that I discovered how horrific those nightmares were. While they woke me and made me crawl to my parents' bed almost every night for the next 3 years, my mum had to recant on the stand what that meant, and for her, it was the blood-curdling screams of a child trapped in a nightmare that I didn't remember. So I don't remember the nightmare, but I only know what she mentioned, which was these screams. And that really took a terrible toll on my parents.
I can't imagine. So, did you have, in inverted commas, a happy childhood after that? Or do you remember your growing up years as quite tragic and traumatic?
I had a very happy childhood. I had the most supportive family. We were a farming family. We had a supporting community. The community around me was amazing. I can't compliment enough the fantastic people in the school, the parents of other children, the other schools in the district health service, the district school service, education department. It was phenomenal. The support out of that community set me on a path very unique from so many other amputees. And I grew up and I came into the space as an adult, believing that that's what happened to everybody. They all went through this process and they had so much support. And it was only as an adult in the last decade that I realized that so many people never got anything remotely close to that. But my childhood was happy. My parents told me that I had to pretty much get on with it. Only I could make the decision to go forward, and only I could be happy with what I wanted to do. But they wouldn't give me an inch. They knew at some point I would grow up and have to be self-sufficient. So I had to be like all the other kids. So the advantages were it was tiring and difficult. Learning to walk is a tough call. You get injured and wounded, and the technology back then in the 70s and through to the 80s and 90s were challenging. It wasn't easy. But I had a very happy time. My family was good, friends were good, and I was active, like riding motorcycles and bicycles and horses and going to school and carrying high school, doing all the things that any other child of that age period would have been doing without too much problem. I just had some limits on how much it took in cost. And it's funny, people ask me, it must be so difficult and you'd like to have it back. And I remember doing that as a tennis player, because I loved tennis at the time. And they said, "Oh, I wish I'd had it back." And I said, "No, I would never take it back. I'd never take my leg back, because it set me on a path to meet the most beautiful people and the most incredible people that I may never have met. And I would not swap my leg for those people, for that experience. Not ever."
For all of those activities and the fulfilled life that you described there was no Taekwondo until you were an adult and at university. Can you remember your first encounter with Taekwondo?
I can. I actually, in that period, ninjas were popular on television.
Yeah.
So, movies were out. We had characters like Jean-Claude Van Damme in the movies. He was a younger man then, obviously. Steven Seagal was coming. Chuck Norris was king, let's face it. Talk about Taekwondo. But it was all ninja, right? So I had this idea in my head that, nothing else had stopped me. I'd been a hockey player and I'd done all these other things, and a tennis player, and I wanted to try ninjutsu. But one of my mates at university from little town I was in said, "Hey, look, I'd like to try this Taekwondo. Come along with me and keep me company." And I thought, yeah, right, I'll have a look at this thing. It doesn't sound as cool as ninja, but we'll give it a whirl. And I walked in and I fell instantly in love with the sport. I stayed longer than those guys ever did. And it only took a short period of time before I went from just being a participant to running the club as the president for the university club as a student, and then later taking over as the head coach in later years.
Why? What captured you?
I just think that, and there are some people that automatically fall into a sport and it suits them to the ground. I like the discipline. I like the determination. I guess I had an advantage with a minimised hamstring on one side. I'm probably a little bit more flexible to start with than some of the other people there. But the passion and energy of the people in the room really encouraged me. And nobody had told me I couldn't do something. Everybody said, go and try it. Isn't that great? And I just fell into the sport naturally, and I've loved it ever since. Like for me, it became natural to help people, and it became natural to try harder, because I guess that my parents instilled that very, very early into me. Try. Only you can do it. No one can say you can or you can't, but you have to try. And so I did.
What I'm hearing there is that the philosophy of Taekwondo mapped quite nicely over your personal philosophy and your approach to life. Is that a fair observation?
I would say that is a very accurate observation. I think when I think about things around Taekwondo and the tenets and that sort of stuff that comes out, the indomitable spirit from old school teaching is there, that sense that never give up. It's a spirit that gives you life. It's a spirit of a sport that encourages and fosters you, just like everything else. And I think that's what really struck a chord with me.
You talked a lot earlier about how different the education system was, the school captains running the lawnmower, but the attitude to people with a disability in sport was very different, even 15 years on from that, in the early 90s, late 80s, when you first discovered the sport. How were you accepted? And indeed, was disability sport considered a pathway or something that you could pursue?
Look, I grew up competing against everybody able-bodied. There was no, my kids were watching television and we loved it. And if you go back those days, the TV I remember was the Rockford Files, and things like that. But Paralympics and disability sports weren't around me because I was so determined to compete against every other able-bodied person. While I used to love running, I remember loving to run as a boy with two legs. And the technology at the time didn't support me running. If I went for a run, I remember running in a school cross country as a teenager when I moved towns, and a 7-kilometer run as a teenager came with 2 weeks of no wearing a leg because of the damage it would do to you as a result of the technology not keeping pace with your needs.
Again, without being unduly explicit, can you explain that to us? I guess you're just asking something artificial and not organic to do the job that your foot, ankle, and knee would normally do. Is that right?
That's right, and it's a complex structure. I mean, I lecture and consult around amputation and educate all aspects of the community, health professionals right through to politicians, and there's some really intense complexity around the organics and connectivity of prosthetics. But basically, you've got a soft body jammed into a hard shell and an interface between the two. So back in those days, you had a woolen sock with a bit of a tiny thin foam that would do the work, and that would connect up to your body, and it would allow you to hold on to your leg. So you had a strap over the top. So a run would mean that you would eventually 7Ks, you're going to squash that foam a little bit, and you'd hit the bottom of your socket with effectively skin and bone.
More or less like being hit with a mallet with the force of 80 kilos for 7 kilometers worth of steps, right?
Well, that's right. And the wear and tear, because, technically you perspire. So those woolen socks are really good at giving you cushioning right up until they got wet. And then when they got wet, they became like sandpaper. And then when they started to dry, then the dried salt crystals turn into more coarse sandpaper. So by the time you did a 7K run, you got to the end. I actually remember that particular run and taking my leg off and going, I'll need a towel to wipe the blood off.
Quite hard to fathom. How did that manifest in your actual Taekwondo competition, though? Did you have to tell opponents? Was there some sort of special consideration given? How did it work practically for you to compete in able-bodied competition with an artificial limb?
Well, back in those days, there was no ruling. There was no consideration. I kind of was new to everybody competing. There weren't very many people in the world with prosthetics, certainly leg prosthetics. So let's think about it. A guy with one leg doing what's considered a kicking martial art. It's a bit weird. And it was kind of trailblazing in some ways. And while there aren't very many records of other amputees participating in that way, no pressure was put on me not to compete. The only thing I had to do was take the appropriate risk mitigation to make sure people were safe, because the sport is about competing in a friendly atmosphere, about skill and ability, not about trying to harm each other. It's about friendly competitive behaviours. And so I would wear extra cover on my leg, so if you bumped into it, it wouldn't present any more difficulty in contact than you would with a normal leg, because it had so much covering. The only advantage, I guess, is my foot didn't stretch out into plantar flex, so where you point your toes. It was fixed at 90 degrees. And so I probably had a little bit of extra reach with the toe that normally wasn't there. But I also didn't have the acceleration factor that came with the calf muscle. So it was a compromise between two. And back in those days, you could actually pull my leg off. And in fact, in my very first competition, a second competition in Armidale, New South Wales, at the University Games, my leg got trapped under a competitor's elbow, and as he stepped back, he took my leg with him. So I ended up bouncing up and down on the spot, asking for my leg to be handed back to continue the round.
Why did you want to compete like that? You said that that Taekwondo was a good fit with your worldview and the way you like to move through life, but that doesn't necessarily equate to wanting to go all the way and become a 4th Dan black belt. What was the call?
Look, it was the passion of the sport. My friends, developed new friendships and lifelong friendships in the sport. And at that point, I was really, like most young men, I wanted to test myself. But I loved competing. I loved the sense of being there and using my skills and being able to achieve at the same level as everybody else. Taekwondo in that period, and opportunistically so too now, was very much an inclusive sport. No one had any pressure on you not to be involved. If you wanted to train, you could train. If you wanted to compete, you compete. It was just, is it safe for everybody? And there weren't measures in place, so the safety was up to you. And I loved that. I was very lucky with an instructor and a master instructor at the time, and I can still hear his strong Korean voice saying, whatever you want to do, I'm not going to stop you. Let's try it. Let's make it happen. Let's do what no one else has done. And that's always stayed with me. And he's been a lifelong. In fact, he's like a grandfather to my children, because that was there. And that was across the board. Wherever I went, that's what I encountered from the Taekwondo community. And I think it's a blessing. I wish it was there in everything we do in terms of disability. It's just beautiful.
When did the transition begin from Taekwondo being for you and flipping over to you being for Taekwondo and moving into coaching, administration, instruction? How did that transition occur?
Look, I think it's a combination of things. I guess getting involved in sport at the university level was about taking up roles and helping and learning new skills. And that's what Taekwondo is really fantastic about, learning new skills. And there was room for people to need to have these support structures in order for the sport to develop. So I got involved there as well. Over time, as I rose through the ranks, my skills started to increase, and Taekwondo was starting to progress into a period where safety becomes a more significant option and consideration. And so, for me, it got to the point where I was moving as a young black belt. We were moving too fast. The power, the speed, and people were scared of me. And I didn't want people to be scared of me. I mean, respect me is one thing, but afraid of me because they feared my right leg, my prosthetic, and its structure doing harm on contact at that speed. Because I developed the skills through the personal time with my master instructor, body movement, the way you're supposed to. So there was no barrier. But I realized that it wasn't right for me to compete or want to compete when people were going to fear me. And at that point, I went, you know what? I've learned so much about my own body mechanics and movement above others at the same level that there was an opportunity. And to be honest, I love teaching. I love sharing knowledge. So to me, that's really important. So when I realized it became more difficult and competitively, they were starting to say, well, look, there's no competition. We're worried about safety. What do we do? And I said, look, it's okay. I'll back out and transition into coaching. So I hosted as the convener of the first university Taekwondo Games competition at the University of Newcastle in '93, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found that I was good at that, as well as enjoying Taekwondo. So I moved from thinking, okay, well, I've got to think about other people. The sport isn't just about competition. It's about sharing knowledge. It's about a community. It's about changing lives. And that, to me, it's a holistic picture. Taekwondo is a beautiful holistic sport that reaches out and touches many parts of your life. And that was the key. I said, right, well, I don't have to compete. And let's face it, Olympically, Paralympically, there's nowhere to go. So there didn't exist anything. I was at the front of that knife edge. There was no particular point that I could go out to, and I was at the stage where I was competing at a level and moving fast at a level that the able-bodied people were worried about competing against me. Even today, I have students 30 years my junior, and I love the fact it gives me a sense of pride and achievement that I can move fast enough and proficiently enough at my age and with my disability that even new fourth dans from other countries worry about facing me off just for like free sparring in a class.
Yeah. Still got it. It's that age when it's nice to still have it, isn't it?
I'm hanging on to that last little bit.
I'm hearing you, brother. I'm hearing you. And do you, though, sometimes have that moment where you think to yourself, gee, if I was a 20-year-old in the same situation in 2020 rather than 1990, the sporting opportunities for elite international competition might be that much greater?
Look, I think it's always come down to the same problem. It's even for me now. There's still no competition officially under the Paralympic classification process for me at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not because it can't be done. That's simply because there aren't very many of us. So most amputees who have a black belt will have gained that qualification prior to amputation. And I know lots of other people around the world, and I coordinate and contact them regularly. But even at this time, it's the density in the competitive population isn't quite there, and we're working towards that. And that's one of the goals for the World Taekwondo and Australian Taekwondo to take that mantle and go that next step. And we are looking at how we can expand that and opportunity to do that. And I think that's a really important thing. It's about planning and vision forward. It may not exist now, and if I was as a 20-year-old in 2020 now, facing that, I would still probably hit the same sort of problem. How do we create that? And it's just a virtue of the time we're living, that we're on the cusp of breaking new ground in this particular sport in this particular way. And if anything, that's actually a really good motivation because you can see it's just on the horizon. We just need to push it to that point. We just got to open those doors. And Taekwondo's doing that.
You were and are a coach and instructor to able-bodied athletes, but
Yes.
You have also taken on a huge diversity of disabilities and introduced people with them into the sport of Taekwondo. Can you tell us a few examples?
Over the years, I think most Taekwondo instructors will encounter people. I guess the thing for me was that people could see that I was an amputee. And the first thing I do is I warn people in the able-bodied in my class by showing my leg and cracking a joke to make them feel comfortable. Not for me comfortable, to make them feel comfortable, which is kind of a funny thing in that space. Over the years, I've worked with a range of disabilities, and I recognised in myself that I'm a people person. And so I like small, close class, and that gives a student the greater opportunity to learn and the focus and around them, because they need that. No matter who you are, one-to-one is really the best option, but especially important in a disability space. People with disabilities tend to feel isolated, so they need to feel important, and that's a really important feature. And I recognise that in myself. So I've dealt with lots of different sports, but in terms of disability for Taekwondo, that's where I really saw lots of disability. So I've dealt and taught those with cerebral palsy, spina bifida, multiple sclerosis, acquired brain injuries, ASD ranges, hearing impaired, vision impaired, and other amputees. There's probably, and obviously some of those buckets include multiple disabilities across individuals. And I can't tell you how rewarding it is to work with other disabilities and to see the incredible energy and effort, knowing that for myself, everything is 25% harder to do. Requires 25% more work to get up in the morning. When most people get up and walk to the bathroom, I crawl to the bathroom, or I hop to the bathroom. Hopping's a bit louder, and I probably have a pillow thrown at my head by my wife. So crawling's a much easier option. And so imagine having someone with a disability who's got cerebral palsy who can't stand. And I've got a beautiful student from the past, Daniel, and Daniel couldn't walk, and his goal, his dream, although he couldn't communicate it very well, was to walk. And we actually achieved a level of mobility for Daniel through training that he could walk. In fact, I made him run on a number of occasions, whether he liked it or not. And the joy and the effort that went into it for him is intense. We're talking about 200% more work than anybody else. Imagine carrying two of yourself on your back and then being told you had to run. And he did, and he loved it. The pain on his face, but the joy just wiped all of it away. And that to me is a cement moment. The look on Daniel's face and the joy in his heart. That's what makes Taekwondo just an unbelievable sport, an empowering sport.
So when you take an 11-year-old girl, peak of his powers, 20-year-old able-bodied male, somebody with an acquired brain injury, somebody who is vision impaired, and you make Taekwondo the through line through all of those people, what have you learned about Taekwondo, and what have you learned about humanity through that process?
I think one of the secret elements of life is challenge. And Taekwondo's core direction or core motive is really about improving yourself. And that's really about challenge. To go forward as a human being, we all strive to do something. But to take it to the next level, you strive to be better, to do better, to improve. And that only comes through challenge, whether a challenge of study, challenge of physicality, or challenge of behavior. That's really important. And that's a central theme of Taekwondo. Challenge yourself. Be aiming at a point in space ahead of yourself that you want to be. And that's the way we grade. That's the way we work through our levels to get better, to know more, to accumulate more knowledge, and to build a better, stronger, around a more holistic person. And I think it's an essence of the whole theme of getting the most out of life. Is the same theme as getting the most out of Taekwondo. They are companions on the same journey. And that's really an important lesson. And it's something I learned very quickly. I would remind myself of that every time I trained on technology that, in the 70s and 90s, where I would walk away or limp away from a training session for going, yeah, that was good, but I'm not going to walk for the rest of the week. And it was like, yeah, it's a cost, but it's worth the cost because I'm getting better. I'm being a better person. And I think that's a really important life lesson around how Taekwondo is important in the lives of other people. You see that in lots of sports, but lots of sports stop when you reach a peak. In a martial art, and especially in Taekwondo, it doesn't stop unless you give up. And that indomitable spirit kicks in. I'm not giving up for anybody. And that's life.
What's your dream for Taekwondo?
My dream for Taekwondo is, if anything, is in the line where Taekwondo is going. Taekwondo is an enabler. It's a facilitator. It's a life builder. And I think it's heading down a path, both holistically and sports-based, towards an endpoint, if you can even imagine an endpoint, or a continuance of improvement for people, individuals, regardless of their ability, of their diversity, of their gender or their nationality. It is all about inclusive behaviours Taekwondo is a beautiful, inclusive process of living. And I think that is the dream in itself, to achieve that. So whether we get there in 1 day, 1 year, 100 years, I know that Taekwondo is heading down that path. And the dream for me in my lifetime would be part of that change, to have an influence to improve for other people, to help other people find Taekwondo and bring it into their spirit or their very lives, and have it shape them in similar ways that it's shaped me, and it's shaped so many Taekwondo practitioners around the world. That to me is the important part of my lifetime. How can I be a part of that? I'm in a particular part of my life where my knowledge accumulation and my abilities allow me to be an active catalyst in the process. So if any dream exists, it's for me to continue to help others discover this beautiful, beautiful sport or martial art in Taekwondo, and in themselves be empowered to continue that journey for themselves, so that others may learn and grow infinitum.
As you sit here now and reflect on an extraordinary life, with many chapters still to be written, I hasten to add, but as you reflect on an extraordinary life, how do you make sense of that moment in the schoolyard back in 1976?
It was obviously a very emotional and powerful time. When you look back at that, I guess in my journey so far, I've learned the universe, I think in some ways, and my philosophy is the universe, whether you choose to imagine that it picks people or it helps you. I've always believed that the universe wants people to have challenge and therefore achieve. Because if it doesn't, you wouldn't be picked to survive. I survived because perhaps the universe saw something in me. Perhaps the universe didn't. Perhaps it was chance. Perhaps it was just the way life exists. But for me, I feel that at that time, that was a crossroad to be a normal member of society and what may have happened. It was just a branch that took me on a new journey of challenge, not for myself alone, but for my family, for my friends. It took me down a path to discovering the key elements of human spirit, just as Taekwondo came into my life at the time when I was still there to learn at university that much more, and the people I encountered and brought me to that space. That's all part of this concept of branching and learning. And I think making sense of that event, it was meant to happen. It was meant to be there, and it hasn't made me weaker in one way, and it hasn't made me stronger in another. But it's given me the opportunity to choose and understand how to make those things for myself and accept them in myself at the same time.
Would you go so far as to call it a blessing?
Without a doubt, more than a blessing. The people I've met, I've got friends with people in this space, nationally, internationally. Hey, it even got me an opportunity to spend time on set and work with Angelina Jolie once upon a time. So
wait, what? You've buried the lead. What's that story? Well, hold that thought. Where all I can think of is Angelina Jolie. Let's talk about that for a moment. What happened there?
Well, I actually went through a period I was actually a little bit sick in 2013. I work hard, and sometimes I get a little engrossed in my work, and I fell sick. And one day at home, I was sick, staying home for a rare sick day off work, and I fell over, getting up too dizzy. I always say there's not enough blood in the body, but I fell over and banged my head, and I ended up spending some time at home as a result. And then I found an opportunity to apply for something, so that when I'm at home, I've got time off. I've always wanted to be an extra, so I pressed a button on an ad that came up saying they're looking for amputee extras. So there's the tie-in. They're looking for amputees for a movie, and I applied for this movie and never heard anything, thought nothing of it. And then some months later, I got a phone call saying, "Hey, we're really interested. Can you come to a casting session?" I actually got on the set of a movie called Unbroken, which was filmed out Cockatoo Island. And it turned out that they were quite quite a lovely bunch of people, 300 plus young men for a war movie, POW style, and they needed some amputees to demonstrate. So I ended up meeting up with a couple of other blokes. My friend Simon was one of them there, and Olympic national tennis player, wheelchair tennis player David Hall, a lovely guy. And we're on set, and not being a shy guy, when the opportunities came for different scenes, they said, well, who wants to come forward to this scene? I remember one particular scene, David and I were sort of standing in the forward position, and I wheeled David forward and said, David, we'll do it. And so we moved forward into position. They put us inside this large shed. It was the middle of the night, pretending to be daytime, the big bright lights. And they picked up David, because David's missing both legs, and put him in his position on the ground. And I was just standing quietly off to the side in the dark. And then this character come out of the shadows and walked over and put a hand out and said, "Hi, I'm Ange." So I actually shook hands and had a chat with Angelina Jolie. And she was so lovely and engaging. It will stay with me forever. So I had a good chat. Then we talked about what was in the scene, and we went off and sat down. But at the end of the scene, they forgot to give me my leg back, because they have to take my leg off of the scene. So they put it on the wall of the shed over the other side, and the producers are around there, and they're looking at the video footage that was taken, production footage, and David had been moved out into his chair and moved off, and I've kind of looked around going, okay, well, this crutch they've given me isn't quite up to scratch for this. It's a prop, not a real McCoy. I'll just get up and hop across the room. So I'm wearing a POW outfit, a hat, and big, heavy, lumpy boots that doesn't fit. And I started hopping, as you do, as an amputee with one leg, across this ground. And of course, that sent the producers into a flurry. "Oh no, I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh." And I said, "Mate, don't worry about it. I do this kind of shit all the time." And that made Angelina laugh. And to this day, I said, "Look, Ange introduced herself to me. I made her laugh. It's all happening, mate. This is how it works." So
it illustrates beautifully the point that you were making, that what at first glimpse was a horror, indeed it nearly snatched your young life away, but it has created possibilities and a mindset in you, dare I say, facilitated by things like Taekwondo, that has given you an existence more extraordinary than you might ever have imagined.
I think it has. I think the lessons you learn around yourself and around what you can do and where you can go, like any other person in any other place, we live in an age where opportunity for those with disability is growing at a massive rate, and recognition of them as individuals. We still joke amongst ourselves that some people still hang on to a legacy behavior. I lost a leg. I didn't have my brain removed. And yet, by the same token, I was in a space with Taekwondo where no one suggested anything except that what I was doing was perfectly normal. And all I had to do was do it for myself. That's it. And that, it's amazing.
Darrel, it has been a privilege to join your journey here on Australian Taekwondo Talk. You are an example of the many extraordinary people that we have in Taekwondo across Australia. Thank you so much for sharing your story so beautifully and so generously. And I feel like we're only midway through the Darrel Sparke story, that there's some exciting chapters still to be written. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Aaron. It was an absolute pleasure.
Now let's learn more about Ageless Taekwondo, part of the Move It Oz initiative.
Yes, Ageless Taekwondo is an exciting new initiative. Well, not that new these days. It's increasingly being rolled out across Australia, and it's taking Taekwondo to people and places that have never experienced it before, with many benefits, both for Taekwondo and for participants. And speaking of participants, the Australian Taekwondo Participation Manager, Ben Exton, is with us to talk a little more about Ageless Taekwondo. Hi, Ben.
Hey Aaron, how you going?
Yeah, good, thank you. What's the history of Ageless Taekwondo?
Well, Sport Australia, they could see that, the population is aging and staying alive for longer. So we've got a bigger group of people in that older demographic. They kind of refer to older Australians as over 65. So because they're living longer, they're having longer issues in terms of their health and fitness and things like that. So they're looking at trying to service that age group a lot more. As people get older, they have issues with falls. That's a big worry for them. And just for females, it's their bone health. For males, they tend to lose a lot of muscle mass. So we actually applied for a grant through them and got some funding to run a modified Taekwondo program we say it's for over 65s, but really it benefits anyone over 50.
You've partially alluded to it there, but what is it that you think that Taekwondo has a special ability to address?
Compared to other traditional kind of health and fitness programs for older Australians, Taekwondo has other benefits as in it trains coordination and agility, and you're learning new patterns and movements and things like that, which is really important for keeping your brain nice and healthy as you grow older. So I think compared to other traditional fitness things, like, for example, body pump or things like that, Taekwondo can really help people's brain health as they get older, and it can really help address falls prevention and things like that. Aging's kind of a process of losing complexity with your movements, so I think Taekwondo is really well placed to teach older people new movements that keeps their brains functioning and new neurons processing and firing and things like that.
It is already up and running in a number of locations across Australia, but what is the strategic rollout plan? How does this get into communities across Australia?
Yeah, well, initially it's about Australian Taekwondo trying to support interested instructors just to credit under the program, understand what some of the goals are from it, what our requirements are to support Australia, and some of the pre and post testing we need to do. It's got a bit of a clinical exercise physiology overlay to it, which was really important. And then once we've set up the instructors, we're trying to empower them and provide them with the resources to really target different areas in their local community, such as through councils, service clubs, retirement homes, things like that. The best way for it to be successful is for us to, empower our accredited instructors, and then for them to be really active in their different localities.
So in fact, it presents two types of opportunity. There's the opportunity for the potential participants to be healthier and happier as they age, but there's also a really genuine opportunity for an entrepreneurial club to embrace a whole other area of their community.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, as I alluded to before, as time's going on, that part of the population is living longer. So they really represent a good opportunity to engage more people in your club in modified Taekwondo and less of the traditional kind of stuff. And as well, I think it's a really good way for clubs and instructors and Australian Taekwondo to help service the older Australians in different communities, and seem to be really active in being community focused.
Well, the whole concept of Australian Taekwondo Talk is about helping us better understand the people across the country that constitute the Taekwondo community, and increasingly that is happening at the young end with schools programs and at the ageless Taekwondo end as well. At the end of each episode in this series, you will be joining us and talking us through various aspects. So whether you are somebody who is active in Taekwondo, or whether you're an older Australian who is interested in living better later in life, make sure that you listen right to the end of each program, because Ben will be along visiting a whole heap of aspects of what ageless Taekwondo can do for you. We'll look forward to talking to you at the end of the next episode, but thanks for telling us a little bit about ageless Taekwondo, Ben.
No worries.
That is Ben Exton there, Australian Taekwondo Participation Manager.
For more information on how you can get involved with Ageless Taekwondo and a whole lot more, head to ostkd.com.au. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram too. Thanks for being a part of Australian Taekwondo Talk.